Well, let's get started. I'm Paul Costello. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Council on Rural Development, but more pertinent to this call, which is the Essex COVID-19 Recovery Forum, as put on by the Local Support and Community Action Group of the Recovery Task Force that Governor Scott set up. So I lead the Recovery Task Force, and when you think about the governor's recovery effort, it really has three major parts. He had one group that he formed that was looking at the immediate challenge to businesses, employers, and workforce. And that group worked really diligently to drive out the connection to federal resources to businesses so that they could recover, they could take advantage of PPP, they could take advantage of other federal dollars that were available. And probably most of you know that Vermont per capita got more than its share of PPP. We performed as well as any place in the United States, and you really have to hand it to that team. The next team's job was to look at the feathering back of the economy. What are the right protocols? How do we open our downtowns back up? What do we do for restaurants and shops and businesses? And how do we look at the financial instruments that are going to be available over time to support those businesses? So they also did a bang up job. Our task force on local support and community action has a longer job ahead of it. I think we were formed out of a certain wisdom by the governor that not all the solutions to the COVID challenge are going to come from Washington, D.C., or even from Montpelier, Vermont. They're going to come from neighbors helping neighbors, good processes that go forward. And it's great to see Catherine Sims on the call and Dave Snedeker, who are leading great work for the Northeast Kingdom. Neighbors help neighbors. Look at what happens really that could be used by another town. So we've been gathering best practices online. We've been in touch with people in small towns and cities across the state in terms of what they're doing to recover. We're sharing those practices. We've sent recommendations to the governor. At this stage, we're managing these county visits to listen to what's going on at ground level throughout different counties. We're going to be doing a little bit of sharing in each of these processes of some of the good practices that are going on statewide and information that's useful statewide. But the bulk of the conversation is really about what are you doing, what's working well, what best practices do you have to share, and then what else do you need to be successful in your county? And that may mean in your community, in your business, or it may be that you're connected to county-wide efforts. We'll gather that. We'll be releasing a platform of findings back to the governor that may have some policy implications as he works forward in recovery. But we also have a visiting team of folks with us tonight that are going to be looking for ways they can help you, either as a business or as a nonprofit or as an organization that's working in recovery. So we've asked folks to come on to provide technical assistance, but there may be follow-up based on the needs of different folks in the community. So it's an honor to be here with you. You wouldn't be on the call except that you care about the future of the kingdom, you care about your community, you care about Essex County. A steering committee was formed early on in the process to think about the issues to be best explored in the kingdom. And they're the ones that determined that education and transportation were important for our agenda. I want to turn to Catherine Sims from the NEK Collaborative, who's a host sponsor with us tonight, to give her a moment to add her welcome.
Sure,
Catherine?
Thanks. Yeah, Catherine Sims, I'm the director of the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, and we're an organization that seeks to bring people together to chart a path to vibrant, thriving Northeast Kingdom. And so grateful to be here with all of you today to reflect on this moment that we're in and surface what's working, what are some of the gaps, and together chart a vision for the future of our region. And so feel honored and privileged to be here with all of you to reflect on this moment and look ahead. And thanks to VCRD for all your leadership.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Dave Snedeker from NVDA will share some reflections, I hope, at the end of the meeting and help us close the night. That okay with you, David?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Paul.
All right, great, thanks. So Jenna Koloski, who's doing a lot to manage these processes. Jenna, could you tell us the rundown of the work for the evening?
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and hi, everyone. Yeah, so what we're gonna do, we're actually gonna, in just a couple minutes here, wrap up with this opening session and break out into those two forums that Paul mentioned were chosen by members of the collaborative board and other representatives from the kingdom. So education and transportation. So feel free to join either of those, whichever one interests you most. In each of those breakouts, you'll have a facilitator to walk through a series of questions. We'll open with a speaker who's going to kind of keynote the session to share some perspective to help to frame and open the conversation. But then we're most of the time going to focus on conversation with all of you. And we'll walk through the challenges that you're seeing today, some vision points for the future. We'd love your recovery strategies you are implementing in your region today and collect those with other regions of this. But also we'll talk about what are some things locally and regionally and statewide that we should be thinking about and working towards as we look to recovery, to recover from this challenge. So I guess the important thing is how are we going to get there to those breakout sessions?
I think this is about proportional to who we're expecting. So hi, everyone. I'm Nick Kramer. I'm staff at VCRD. Really excited to be here tonight and part of this conversation. Think that this topic is obviously super critical, both within COVID-19 recovery and before anybody had ever heard of COVID-19. And really curious to hear all of your ideas and hear some of the challenges of what we're seeing in Essex County and the Northeast Kingdom more broadly. So thank you all for being here. Hopefully everybody is in the right breakout forum. I just want to re-emphasize something Paul touched on in the opening session, which is just we're blessed tonight to have a super dynamic team visiting experts, folks who are here with all kinds of different expertise to help us think about resources and strategies. But the main theme of tonight is really about you guys, the participants, and the visiting team are here primarily in a listening role. They will be kind of contemporarily reflecting and sharing resources, but this is not a top-down process in any way, shape, or form. We're here to hear what's going on in Essex and the kingdom more broadly, and really leverage the grit and ingenuity of Vermonters and all the stuff that makes us such a great state. So want to lay that out on the outset. I'll let the visiting team members introduce themselves. I'm sure they can do a better job than I can, but I do want to at least go around and acknowledge who's on the call tonight, starting with Catherine. She just introduced herself in the opening session. I won't say much more. I just do want to take the opportunity to underscore that Catherine and the NEK Collaborative have been an absolute peer partner in crafting these recovery forums, and is in so many ways much more of an expert on what's going on in the kingdom than we are. So really invaluable support in terms of her lending guidance and helping frame this discussion. I believe some of these breakout topics are in alignment with a recovery plan that the collaborative just published. So I'll let her say more about that when we get into it, but just want to highlight that. Looking around the room, we have with us John Tracy as well. So glad, John, you could be here, joining us from Senator Leahy's office. Really excited to hear John's reflections towards the end on some of the work going down in Washington. I know this topic is really dear to the senator's heart, so thank you so much for being here. And lastly, we have Linda, and I'm sorry ahead of time, Michaniewicz. Am I saying that right? Michaniewicz?
It's Linda Michaniewicz.
Michaniewicz. Thanks for the correction, Linda. And thank you for being here. Linda is here representing the Building Brighter Futures Coalition, the Northeast Kingdom chapter, which is well, she can say more, but it's a collective of childcare experts and childcare providers and early education professionals. And so really excited to have Linda here and all the perspective that she'll bring on that subtopic. And lastly, really quick, we sort of were back and forth. I'd be remiss not to acknowledge Jenna, my esteemed colleague, who will be here sort of providing background technical support. So if anybody has any glitches or anything happens on the tech side of things, feel free to reach out to Jenna in the chat. So I guess Catherine's actually going to start us off by sharing sort of a brief reflection of some of the challenges that she's seeing from her organizational vantage point within the topic of education and recovery. Before I turn it over to Catherine, just a couple really quick Zoom housekeeping things. I don't think I even need to say this looking around the screen, but let's all just try to stay muted to eliminate those barking dogs and crying babies and et cetera. And I'll go over, I think, hand-raising protocols and stuff when we get into the discussion. But for now, I think I've talked quite enough, and I'd love to turn it over to Catherine to kind of open the discussion and talk about some of what she's been seeing and related to education and recovery.
Sure, thanks, Nick. I am definitely not the expert in here, especially as I look around this room. So I'm really looking forward to our group conversation and hearing from everyone about what you're seeing. But I think maybe I was asked to open us off, maybe in part because the NEK Collaborative just released its recovery plan, which included education as a priority focus for the recovery for the region. And as a part of the building the recovery plan, we did some extensive interviews with folks throughout the region. And so I can maybe just try to lift up some of the things that we heard through that process around both impacts that we're seeing, but also some of the exciting emerging strategies that we may want to lean into as we look towards the recovery. But again, just hoping to spark some conversation here amongst all of you about what you're experiencing. So maybe top of the list, I think we all know that broadband connectivity is an incredible challenge where our region still lacks behind. And this spring, as schools moved to remote learning, there were some real challenges for teachers, families, and students around staying connected to school and learning during the shutdown time. There have been some efforts to make progress on that over the summer, but I think that remains a significant concern as we look towards the fall. We've also seen and heard a lot about some challenges in Northern Vermont University, a sort of not only some public remarks by Jeb Spalding that sort of questioned the future of the university, but also just some financial realities around COVID-19 with folks deferring and delaying enrollment. And so there's some real financial challenges that our institution of higher education in our region faces. And again, some efforts by the legislature to address the financial challenges, but still, I think a significant concern going into the fall. We've heard a lot about childcare strains. As a parent of two small children, I know this from a personal experience, both the concern around lack of slots, availability of slots, and the financial pressures that our child care centers are facing, especially during the shutdown time during this spring, and some of the adjustments to student-teacher ratios and all the accommodations around COVID are putting some significant financial pressures on our already limited early child care system. We've also heard from schools as they look to the fall, and they're offering multiple different choices around remote learning or in-person learning. A significant number of families are choosing to homeschool this year. That creates some additional challenges for school finances. But I think the legislature is working hard to address that, to ensure that financial aid and support for schools is tied to enrollment from previous years, not this current year. So those are maybe some of the kind of big challenges that we've heard rise up as a result of COVID-19. And also just want to touch on some exciting emerging strategies. I think the the challenges to NVU have created an opportunity for our region to come together and speak loudly with one voice about how vital NVU is, not only for providing access to affordable higher education, but also playing a significant role around economic development within our region. And the sort of threats to the whole Vermont State College system and its viability as a result of COVID-19, I think similarly has brought all the colleges together to speak with one voice about how important the state college system is in terms of providing pathways forward. And hopefully that will help chart a sustainable path forward for all of the university systems, including Northern Vermont University. There have been, I think, some short-term gains over the summer to increase access to high-speed internet with some wireless solutions set up at town halls and libraries to ensure that every community in our region has a hotspot that's publicly accessible. And there's the line extension program and some other efforts to really target students and make sure that everyone is connected, but there's still a long way to go there to make sure that kids can be connected to online learning. We've seen a lot of innovation, I think, around outdoor classrooms. The childcare center that my son goes to, they are outside almost all day now, and have really, brought the entire classroom outside. They're eating lunch outside. They have a really cool tent space that they're using, and I think a lot of our elementary schools are thinking about how to have outdoor spaces for every single classroom. And that feels like a pretty exciting innovation that may carry on beyond COVID-19. How do we do more place-based learning outside of the four walls? I think there were some innovative strategies around food access as a result of the crisis, with schools delivering meals, even when students were learning remotely, which I think demonstrates our ability to provide universal meals to all of our students. And hopefully that's something that we can carry forward, recognizing the important role that schools play in providing access to healthy, nutritious foods for all of our kids. And so maybe that's where I'll just end, just some of the things that I've noticed and heard from around opportunities and challenges related to education as a result of this crisis, but really look forward to hearing from all of you about your experiences and what you see as opportunity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Catherine, for sort of laying that out there, kicking us off. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. Really also looking forward to getting into it. I think before we dive in, I'll just outline a little bit what the next 80 minutes or so are going to look like in terms of where we're hoping the conversation will go. We have basically 4 questions outlined to answer tonight, which hopefully follow a somewhat logical order, starting with what are the challenges we're seeing, what do we want in this area, what are some promising strategies, and finally, what are some ideas for future strategies. And the selection of those questions is really intentional. It's partly helpful to guide a conversation so we don't get bogged down in any particular thing. But also, as has been mentioned a couple times, these forums are part of a larger statewide series and really designed to gather input to take back to the recovery task force and ultimately the governor himself. And so it's really nice to have a little bit of a consistent format in comparing regions and comparing ideas, and hopefully we can take all of that input eventually and craft policy and reflect back, share good best practices among different areas. So that's a little bit the background intentionality behind the questions, and I'll do my best to be sort of a gentle touch shepherd through those. So one more or several more little pieces of Zoom housekeeping. I think it's really helpful, since we're more than a small handful of us on the call. If we try to raise hands when we want to speak, you can either raise your flesh and blood real hand if you have video, or for those of us who are particularly Zoom adept, at the bottom of your screen, if you hover your mouse, you should see a little icon that says participants. If you click that, it should bring up a little side panel. And then I believe it's right next to your name somewhere. There's an option that says raise hand. And what that'll do is just pop up a little blue virtual hand next to your video, and I'll be able to see that and kind of keep track of who's waiting to speak and who's queued up. And if you have any questions, obviously, just feel free to shout them out. So all that being said, oh, and then the final thing, just we're a small enough group. We've got plenty of time. If it's your first time you're speaking, maybe just give a quick introduction. We can see names, but it might be helpful to know where you're from. Any organizational affiliation you may carry that's relevant to the conversation and kind of why you want to be here. So any other questions notwithstanding, let's get into it. The first place to start, hopefully logically, is what are we seeing as the biggest challenges in this area, and kind of what are some points of potential change with regards to education and recovery. And I'll turn it over to whoever would like to start us off.
Hi, my name is Colleen.
Hey, Colleen. Go ahead.
Start us off. I think I am, and I pretty much in my neighborhood, I have seen a dramatic increase in the incidence of adverse childhood experiences. I live in downtown Newport, and we have had a murder-suicide on our street with 3 young children under the age of 6 present in the house. I've witnessed personally on the summer solstice a street riot, which happened as the result of 2 overdoses in the middle of Prospect Street. Then the 2 drug houses had a sort of fist fight in the street, and then there were a lot of police cruisers. I see a lot of children needing food, right? But so suffering from the adverse childhood experience of more inequity in terms of economic status and strata, so that those who were suffering from poverty before are now suffering infinitely more. It is all wrapped up into this connectivity, right? So that those inequities also are magnified. So we see inadequate mental health services impacting those adverse childhood experiences. We see children living in fear, children potentially returning to school, wearing masks and only seeing masks when we know as health professionals the optimal human childhood neurodevelopment occurs in conditions of love, peace, happiness, and joy, and yet, and also developing empathy, which requires seeing a human face. So as a mom, I feel very fortunate. My children are older now, but I think looking at the impact of that as it will affect us in terms of the increasing adversity that our children are growing up experiencing, and what that has long term, and as well as the immediate term. And thank you for hearing my thoughts.
No, thank you so much for sharing those, Colleen. I mean, that's obviously incredibly horrific to hear about some of the details. If I could just ask quickly a follow-up question. I mean, it seems like, particularly in regards to mask wearing and some of the connectivity barriers, there are some specifics to COVID-19. I just want to be clear, are you saying, are all of these incidents in your mind really directly related to the pandemic? I mean, is this, let's hope, a major departure from sort of the status quo? And I'm wondering if you care to dig in on that a little bit more, that correlation.
Yeah, I would be happy to. It's actually, no, not very, very super different from the status quo, but it is very magnified from the status quo. This is a region, this part of downtown Newport experiences a greater than 53% child poverty rate, which has only increased since the onset of these economic interventions to mitigate the effects of a clinical pathogen. So one, that's fascinating from a nurse's point of view, that I couldn't get my teeth cleaned, yet I could get a goddamn bottle of liquor pretty quick. And I sure did. And I'm sure a lot of people did, because that is a coping mechanism, right? That results from adverse childhood experiences identified in that, right? So we have a current generation experiencing intergenerational adversity and trauma, right? Now trying to cope with the imposition of, and well, first the occurrence of a global pandemic, which threatens their, and so the somewhat like nonsensical interventions that are put in place, right? Of equity in populations, Black, brown population left out of the conversation constantly.
I hear you, Colleen, and I think you're breaking up just a little bit. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty.
Showing a light where the braces already are, because it's a valid.
Oops, and there goes Colleen. Okay, well, on that sobering note, maybe while Colleen gets reconnected, other challenges that we're seeing or other perspectives people have on this question of what's up right now in Essex County and in the Northeast Kingdom location. Yeah, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Snedeker. I work with the Northeastern Vermont Development Association. So some of the challenges that I've seen are some of the ones that Catherine's already mentioned, in particular broadband. So I think lack of investment in broadband has really exacerbated the situation once everybody had to go to remote learning. So it is nice to see that there are efforts to improve that at the state level and the local level as well. One of the challenge I think we're going to be facing is as we try to bring students back to school, we also have a number of older institutions or schools that we're trying to do social distancing. I think that's going to present a challenge for some schools in particular. So I think some way they're looking at least at Lake Region where my kids go, is that some kids are going to go a couple of weeks and some kids are going to go other days. And then some kids are just going to choose to go home. So it's going to be a different type of learning environment, and try everybody along equally is going to be quite a task, I think. And then I guess the last challenge, and I'll just keep workforce development to education. Before this whole COVID, our biggest problem was finding enough workers to help the businesses in our region get closer to full employment. Now we have a whole different set of challenges. We have a challenge of getting workers to be able to, and companies to figure out how to bring workers back and when. And we already know that some companies aren't going to be back as many people as they had before. So, and then challenges faced by my son, for instance, will be a senior this year, and he had friends that graduated last year, and they're unsure if they want to move into the secondary education or college because they don't really want to learn virtually. So what do we do with these people for the coming year? So ideally we'd connect them to existing jobs in the area, but it's all stuff that we have to work on just over time, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, what I'm hearing in that is that it's sometimes really hard to have these like isolated topic conversations without touching anything else, right? We've already in this education forum touched on broadband 3 or 4 times, and workforce development is a huge barrier. And so they're definitely all connected. Yeah, I see a finger going up from Senator Starr. Senator, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
It's a little different setup than what I'm used to dealing with Montpelier, but I'm glad to be here with you folks tonight, and mainly to find out what I could do to help our area in Montpelier, and it's good to see John Tracy here from Senator Leahy's office, who is responsible certainly for helping to bring quite a lot of money to our area. One of the problems that we've run into with broadband and using CARES funds for that is that the money has to be used up by the end of the year, or you lose it. And so what we're proposing, I believe that you'll see, is 330 three grants coming out that will be staggered, and it should add up to a lot of money to help get broadband wired out to these remote areas like where we live. And of course, we're working on the 21 fiscal year 21 3/4 budget. We started this week on it. And I know that we've already talked about putting a lot more money, COVID money, into the child care area, and also into the school meals programs, and helping to make sure that people don't go hungry. Of course, the education, I've always been very interested in providing good education for our young people. And I spent, 21 years, I think it was, on our local school board. And my old legislative district, the entire district, we got all new schools built there. And it's just so important that we provide the very best for our young people to be well educated. So that's why I picked education as your forum to listen and to help with. NVU is, of course, critical to, I think, our entire Northeast Kingdom and south of us as well. And we did appropriate money for them for last year to get through. And we're talking about doing another $35 million this particular fiscal year to make sure that the school stays strong and healthy, both colleges and VTC. But anyways, I'm working on the issues in Montpelier, and very supportive, of course, of them. And anything else we can come up with is an ideal time for this to be happening, because we are doing the budget, the 3/4 budget right now. So it's good to be here, and hopefully we'll come up with some good ideas. And if we had 10, maybe we can get a couple of them passed, who knows? But we will know if we don't try. So it's good to hear and see Catherine and Dave and everybody. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Senator. Sean, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Couple comments. I want to just touch briefly on the situation with the Vermont State College system. One thing that I've thought is reflected on is that the pandemic has had an uncanny way of finding the cracks in our system and exploiting that, taking structures that have been fragile and really destabilizing them. I just want to highlight the importance of the college system and NVU in particular to our community economy and workforce. Because, I'm the leader of VRH, and one of the biggest challenges we have, which continues to be a challenge is workforce. And, we struggle to find enough nurses, but also struggle with a lot of allied health professional roles, whether that's in radiology, in lab, throughout our entire system. And we ran some numbers this couple months ago when NVU looked like it was really under threat. And at NVRH, we have a workforce of something north of 600 people, right? About 620, 630. And we went through our records to identify how many of our staff have a degree from a Vermont State College System school. It's 119. Those are the ones that we tracked. That's over 20% of our workforce got a degree through that system, most of them through NU or VCT. So it's incredibly important to us to see that that system remain and is strengthened through this process, especially for the community served by NVU in the Northeast Kingdom. The other thing I just want to make a comment, I'm going to fast forward, this is more boots on the ground, kind of practical challenge we're dealing with now. What we're observing near the start of the school year, at Northeastern Vermont Regional Hospital, our workforce comes from all over the Northeast Kingdom and other parts of the state or New Hampshire. And so we don't have workforce that comes from the school system. And many of our school systems are doing the hero's work of trying to put together structures to educate kids. But what we're seeing is that every single school system is taking a different approach to how they're going to educate their kids. And so, for example, Kingdom, they've done a great job in their strategies to have an all online program, which is great, and a 5-day-a-week person program, versus the St. Johnsbury School, where they're going a couple days a week for some kids and a couple days a week for other kids. The impact they're having on us as employees is trying to support our staff, give them the flexibility they need so that they can care for their kids when they're not at school, while at the same time continue to be gainfully employed. And because all the different school systems are taking different approaches, we're finding it incredibly hard to support our staff in that process.
That's a really interesting perspective, Sean. I mean, you hear about the discrepancies in kind of equity between for students of learning models and distance learning access, but it's really, think of the trickle down or trickle up effects on their fees and kind of workforce as well. I see that Representative Page has a virtual haste up, and then Sharon, I just saw yours, I want to come to you. I do want to slowly transition us sort of away from challenges and into think about kind of what we would like to see, what's the ideal world within the arena, but don't want to cut off anybody's comments. So just be thinking, keeping that in the back of your mind as we move forward. And yeah, Representative, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm originally from Newport, and I represent Newport City, Coventry, Irisburg area. And I thought it was interesting to listen in on what's going on in Essex County, which might have some effect or create some ideas for my own county in Orleans 2 district. So some of the ideas I have that have already been, but I'll just briefly discuss. The state colleges, keeping them open and accessible for Northeast Kingdom is extremely important. In an area that is in some ways an educational desert. We've all heard of food deserts, and up here having NVU, Lyndon Johnson, and Randolph, those schools are very important for the students that graduate from high school in the area here, and having it accessible to them. It allows them to, it basically allows them to further their education and then help their studies and maybe even in some cases, move out of the area to other places. Opening of these colleges, I think you've seen in Burlington where there's issues about students coming back and properly quarantining. UVM is looking at that. I think the Burlington area is also involved in it. There's issues with students partying, and I think the governor has just come out and said that bars, or maybe it's a Mayor Weinberger that has come out and said that bars can close, or to lessen that impact on students that might be spreading the virus. So anyway, state colleges are important. High school systems, homeschooling, there's going to be more of it. There was a recent poll where more parents are more inclined to keep their children at home. And I'm wondering whether those meal deliveries will continue on to those children that will be staying home and being homeschooled. Those students that do actually go, that will be attending high school or grade school, we certainly have to ensure that we protect children as well as teachers will be teaching our students. There's also, for those students who are homeschooling, the broadband support. There's been, I know the state legislature has provided some monies for line extensions for broadband. I think it's something like $3,000 per family. But if you're on a road that's a half mile down the street in these communities, that $3,000 is not going to go very far. And I have heard there is some discussions or looking into maybe satellite communications. So I think that's something that the Public Service Board is looking at. The other thing, if you do extend those lines for various families, will those families actually take on a subscription for broadband later on? The other issue is with the schooling is the transportation. Orleans County and Essex, transport kids to North Country Union. Perhaps some of them also go on to Lakeland. And I'm curious how we're going to separate children on buses when they're traveling long distances from say Island Pond to Newport. So those are just some of the challenges that I see that come to mind. I'm sure there's lots others that we'll probably get into, but those are some of the ones that have come to my mind. Thank you. Incidentally, I'm not on any education committee, transportation committee. I'm actually on the healthcare committee in the as House. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, just so clear the vastness of the constellation of issues in this arena. Sharon, I saw that you had hand up. I want to come to you, but like I say, I want us to transition a little bit towards thinking there's clearly a lot of challenges related to education. I'll out there to the group to thinking about like what does the dream scenario look like? And I guess I'll lay out obviously it's tempting to say, well, the challenges that we identified, those, right? But maybe what does that look like if we had to really paint a vision for what does a thriving educational sphere in Essex County or the Northeast Kingdom look like? And what are some of the components of that? So equitable access to broadband, but what does that look like concretely? And kind of shift the lens a little bit towards where are we hoping to go? And then the idea of our next couple questions will be, well, what are some strategies either in existence or some ideas we could think of to get there. So Sharon, with that, not to put you on the spot,
I'll go fast.
eager to hear your
Fast, and I'll make it positive and then segue it.
perfect.
I'm from Leamington. Does everybody know where that is? Okay, good. I'm the library director in Canaan, Vermont, which is a northeast corner town. And I'm on the fairly new NEK Choice School Board for Leamington, which is, and I wrote it down, Leamington, Bloomfield, Brunswick, Maidstone, Guildhall, East Haven, Victory, Cranby, Avery, and Ferdinand. So it's fairly new. Senators helped us a lot. Leamington had the highest tax rate in the state of Vermont at 248 when we district. I have two specific things I want to talk about. One is broadband. I live on a state paved road and am attempting to apply for grants. All residents of Leamington are, and we can't even get calls. We cannot get call from fiber. And I live on a state paved road with no cell service. There's no VTEL, there's no consolidated, there's no fibercast, there's nothing. Which is really hurting our choice students because we don't have a school. All those places just told you don't have a school to. The second issue, a pet project of mine. So I need some help with broadband. If anybody can direct me, segueing to, I need help and to see what that will look like for choice towns. And the second thing for choice towns is we're on the Connecticut River, and a lot of our students go to New York for school because school's 2 miles away. That's really meaningful to a lot of parents, and the dollars are going to state, but it's necessary. So I'm going to mix fast. My son to a New Hampshire school. New Hampshire schools are saying, here's our virtual learning. You want to keep your kid home, you want to sign up for all virtual, you go to a New Hampshire charter school, and they will not pay for our students. Vermont residents that don't have a fully remote option. The children are being forced to go to school because their New Hampshire schools won't pay for their twin kids from Vermont to go tuition school. I turned local Vermont school and said, okay, so can we get into VTVLC because we're Vermont residents, and they asked that $450 a credit. So every student in these towns that I mentioned that are New Hampshire are belong from a fully remote access, and they may have health concerns at home, and it's a huge problem. I need Dan French, who's from my area. Dan used to work here. I need some help. So if anybody has a suggestion, we have 12 kids in our town that go to school in Leamington. There's 12. Most of them go to New Hampshire to school. We just have to. So where do I get that 12 people? I would like some help and some ideas, and come visit me at the library in Canaan. Thank you, Nick. I'll be fast.
Thank you so much. And hopefully, yeah, that can be one outgrowth of these forums. I mean, either within this breakout session or more broad. If folks are to connect, please feel free to exchange emails and contact information in the chat if you're comfortable sharing public, or you can always reach out to us afterwards and we're happy to make connections. So if it doesn't feel too tastelessly to shift in positive realm after all the real challenges, does anyone want to take a stab on kind of first brushstrokes of the vision for does somebody want to set some markers where we're headed within education in the area? I see Lorraine. I think you're muted at the moment, Lorraine.
I just wanted to not about childcare because Catherine spelled that out getting as lack of capacity and financial challenges, and didn't get mentioned again. But I think there's a lot being done. I think the legislature did put a lot of money towards it. I heard Senator Starr mention that there's making money again. I know there's some grants coming out or are in the pipeline right now. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there has been a lot done. There always needs to be more because there are some challenges there. Then also things that I think could be done. There's been a lack of qualified staff, and so maybe some. And then I'm hearing about higher ed, and so getting those together. So some more higher opportunities for staffing for early childhood educators, and then encouraging new people into the field. I know your tech center does with early ed, which is great, and maybe some more, how to get people more from the pipeline into the field would be great. I know it sometimes. Chris Nelson works up there. Is that another call right? Because I'm from Moorville. I'm not from the Northeast Kingdom. I don't know if I'm allowed on this this virtual meeting, but she was saying how there's some people, especially home providers, sometimes want to get into the business, and it's hard. It's hard to navigate, and it's not easy to get in. Like, where do I go? It's the website somewhere. So an easier path to get into the system might be helpful.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm definitely hearing that loud and clear. The need for better connections, kind of in the higher ed world, and in an ideal world, kind of even more streamlined access for folks looking to connect to child care and early ed resources. Anybody else to take a swing, add on to vision, or really highlight some sort of particular area in which something concrete that we'd really like to see in there? It's maybe the hardest job, right? If we had a beautiful, clear and a clear path to get there, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But anyone? Yeah, Jenna.
I'm not really answering. I'm Jenna O'Farrell, the Executive Director of Northeastern Community Action. I'm not really resting. I just wanted to talk about a strength. We offer Head Start programming in Gilman and Island, and I think just to highlight the strength of small communities as well, that in Essex, and we have an outpost in Canaan, that really the unity makes huge difference when people work together. And through the last months in our Head Start centers and our Canaan office, the strength of what we had to offer an agency was really enriched by everyone who participated. And I think that neighbors who help neighbors and people who show up for each other are really the backbone of any kind of systems and structures that we really want to put into place. And I wish tonight there was more folks who actually live in Essex County, because I live in Osprey, and I appreciate all of our staff that we have and all the participants and everyone that we work with in Essex County. But I really feel voice is really meaningful and powerful, and the forums that I participated in Canaan and Island were really inspiring. And I feel maybe there's a sense of resiliency that Essex County holds, and that when we can get to the root of it, can really be inspirational for their state. I just wanted to add that. Some positivity there.
Yeah, no, Jenna, I think that's really important not to lose sight of. And again, the whole reason that we're doing this, right, is to gather voices and leverage local grit, right? I live in rural Orange County, and we're fiercely proud of a similar dynamic. So I guess I'm going to box us in. Yeah, go. Feel free.
I think this has been touched on, but just to be explicit about maybe the hope for the future and VU, I think what we've heard in many conversations is to bring the annual state aviation to the Vermont State College system in line with other neighboring states, which is not the case. We've also heard a call to revisit VSAC portability. We are one of the few states that allow state grants for tuition to go with students out of state, and the ask there would be that state dollars for education go to Vermonters who choose to seek higher education within the state.
Yeah, no, those are both interesting and specific points. I wonder, to put in, yeah.
Can I add just one other thing? back to the broadband and given that the line extension program will look for a very few who live a mile or less from the end of an existing fiber or cable line, and sitting in a parking lot at a library is not ideal learning for students, that we explore options that if schools shut down and move to all remote learning, that we look at how libraries and schools and other existing buildings could be indoor hubs for students who do not access that. We need to have a plan B for remote learning so that students who do not have access at home do not continue to fall further behind. And how do we look at some of the existing infrastructure we have and maybe continue to make that available for students who need to go to connect.
As a library director, I just want to jump in that hotspots are being loaned. That's working very. That's a success story. And I got a Vermont Humanities grant to buy laptops, and I have outdoor PC stations with priority for applying for services, food insecurity, jobs, unemployment, things like that. Telemedicine, got a grant. I got that grant, and we Wi-Fi to over a mile entire rec park for everybody. So libraries would lose conversation. So that's going on. That's going on in Canaan, which is awesome.
And it just sort of break heart that all spring there was someone here at the Spray Library sitting on the porch in the rain, in the snow, connecting with his students because he did not have connectivity at home, and while the buildings are with no one in it.
There are only 3 libraries in Essex County. We're one of them, and unfortunately, it's tiny. We can't people in because of square footage, 6-foot physical distancing, because of problems with that. And 3 in Essex County, since this is an Essex County discussion.
Yeah, that's. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just kind of jump on that because there may be opportunities when you talk space issues to, there's a lot of underutilized infrastructure throughout all the counties, whether Essex or Caledonia, and there may be an opportunity to engage the faith-based community and maybe repurpose church basements, that thing for this type of purpose as well. Shouldn't have closed all those one-room schoolhouses after all.
Yeah.
2020 hindsight. Well, you guys are ahead of the curve in terms of agenda here. I think it's a really great natural segue into talking about, we're starting to, what are the promising practices that we see emerging in the area. Hearing a lot of leveraging public buildings as one potential. I have to say, of all the library porches, not in foul weather, of course, but to work in a public library has got to be one of the most beautiful in all of the states. No sympathy there. But seriously, what else are you guys seeing on the ground that's either effective or has the potential maybe to be effective with some tools? What are people doing to all of or some of the things that we've talked about so far as challenges? Any other bits of shining best practices? Yeah, Dave.
One observation I had was that when children went to learning, it was really good practice for maybe doing in college, whether it's in Vermont or elsewhere. There are a lot of online universities out there now, so I kind of hinted they should be really thinking how to do the best in this sort of a situation. And it was really good to see CCV, all the graduating seniors last year, free courses to get a head start in college.
Yeah,
go ahead, Senator.
The special needs children, they really need hands-on and being, in a setting where they can get the one-on-one help that they really need. And, the more advanced students, they can learn online maybe and do all those things. but the children with special needs, if it can possibly be done, they should be in school where they can get training. But the issue I think is making sure we get on my end is making sure that we proper funding for our schools and for our universities and the food situation, which is, it's good. And Sharon, I could give you my email if you don't have it, and see your issues, and I'll get on to that for you.
That's very kind of you. Think very helpful with our Act 46 and our tax issue. Thank you. I will do that.
Yeah. But anyways, you know, we've got a full load ahead of us, you know, all in Vermont, but we've always had a half a load more than anybody else up here in the kingdom. And we've, well, you know, we help other and get along pretty darn. But the big thing is making sure that we get this band done while there is some federal money that we can use for it. But anyways, I'm listening now.
No, I really appreciate that, Senator. Yeah.
I mentioned this at the top, but just want to bring it forward again. I think, you know, there's some pretty innovative things happening around place-based outdoor learning, outdoor classroom spaces, and also some, you know, innovative kind of family pandemic pods working to figure out how to, you know, meet the needs of families who aren't bringing their kids to school. And there's efforts to rehabilitate buildings and address some of the HVAC issues. But across all those, I really worry about equity, that it's the communities that have the most resources that are often able to innovate this way. And I think maybe there's opportunity for more statewide best practice development and innovation emanation, both resources and best practices, so that it's not just the communities who have the most support who can develop ad hoc informal learning environments or outdoor classroom spaces, or make sure it has universal meals, or make sure students have the air quality that they need in their building to stay safe. I really worry that this crisis is going to exacerbate the inequities already experienced in our region if we're not actively ensuring everyone has access to the resources to do some of the best practices that we're.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's something that obviously many of us think about a lot in terms of how do we leverage good ideas in one place and take them to other places. I'm curious if anybody else on the call has any experience with local organizer groups or mutual aid groups that have popped up in response to the pandemic, and maybe utilizing those to some degree as a tool for cross-pollination, or if there are other kind of communication structures out there. I mean, Catherine, that's a good chunk of what you do. But I'm curious if there's other ideas while we're on this topic of best practices. How are we connecting across towns, connecting our regions within the NEK to, if we hit on something outside of course this wonderful forum, which is not in and of itself any kind of silver bullet, like what are those human sharing infrastructures in place? And I think traditionally, rural Vermont, that's one of our major points of resilience. But now that we're kind of into this artificial virtual sphere, are there ways of bringing forward that community spirit and that neighborhood? That's one standing question I have. I'm curious if anybody has reflect on that.
You know, here in Caledonia and Essex County, our health service area, we've been working on what we call an accountable health community, and it's called A Prosper. And I think one thing that we found as the pandemic, the relationships and structures that we built to the social drivers for health, housing, access to nutritious food, to quality healthcare, we were able to leverage connections and relationships and globalize. So we rapidly ended access to food resources in partnership with the Vermont Food Bank. And we rapidly mobilized, really under the leadership of General Health, to address the homeless situation in communities. And it was those relationships that we already had that enabled us to be so successful areas.
And yeah, and I think that's something we're hearing all over the place, right? That those relationships, especially if they're standing, just pay ends in times of crisis. Anybody else on that topic of kind of community cross-pollination or other strategies? Yeah.
I have to brag up the Culturally Connected group. I'm new to the group, but I just left a meeting there tonight, and they are a 501c3 that came out of the Oralton Foundation grants for community grants. I'm new in that group, so I just left the meeting. They're doing welcome kits and saying on equity for everything with the women, and Canaan is so lucky to have this. They once a month, and they are covering all the bases. If you're a new resident in town, to the kids at school, and applying for grants, and every grant I apply to as the library, I hear this all the time. I say, you're the only one, and you're, other than Canaan Nationally Connected, you're the only one in Essex County that even applied. So thank goodness we have them. I wish I could talk more about them, but I can't, because I just can't. But I would like to brag that they're just doing a phenomenal job. We are so much more blessed. We're so isolated. We rely on New Hampshire for our schools, our hospital. I'm on the board of the directors of our hospital, which is in Colebrook, New Hampshire. That's where our primary care offices are too. So it's very unique. I would like to see that work a little more seamlessly. It tends to work better with people coming to Vermont for services than us going to New Hampshire. It doesn't seem to work for us going over there as well as people coming here. So we're fortunate to have the culture we have in Canaan, even though I'm from Leamington.
That's great, Sharon. Yeah, and I think speaks exactly to Catherine's point about just sometimes it being the luck of the draw, kind of where you're at and what the human capital resources are on the ground. Representative Page, go ahead.
Yes, Ms. Ellingwood brought up an issue regarding grants, and I was curious. It seems to me, anyways, there is money, there is grants out there if you know about them, but how easy is it to apply for those grants in your experience? It's my understanding it's not the easiest to fill out those grants and to do it properly and to get it in on time and what have you. So
I think if you are very super comfortable with the digital component, they've been very easy. The Vermont Humanities Grant was the easiest thing I've ever applied for. It was $5,000, and which was significant for us. And the Tillotson Foundation is a big deal up in this area and in Quebec. Very generous. Mr. T was born in, and we get a $5,000 every year that we don't even have to apply for. I also applied for a Microsoft Access Point grant, and because rural, I got it. Only 15 libraries, I think, in the country got it, and we got one. So you have to go, and if you can apply online, you can do fast and get going, and you got to.
Well, what about state grants?
Department of Libraries grants are for me, but again, I've got the library structure that I lean on. Canaan Now Connected is involved with the project that Sean, you just talked about, the hub project. I didn't say it right, but we talked about that tonight, and we're getting on board with that too. So I think if you're the Historical Society in Leamington, which is because of my mother and two of my cousins that are all over 75 years old, that's not where their comfort is to get it digitally as much. Do we have the highest rural population in Essex County, state of Vermont? Maybe, there's a good chance we do. Hurt. And no broadband. And they don't have internet connection, so.
And I feel like within this conversation about resources, to your question, Representative, about distance and being able to apply for some of these grants, I mean, we'd be really not to point out a number of partners just on this screen who can offer some support. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to, of the visiting teams, take a moment to step forward, but I mean, I know regional commissions can be some of great assistance, either applying to helping with actual applications or at least identifying the constellations out there, right?
And also Dave Snedeker's organization also is a big help too. But
exactly, regional planning commissions of all stripes and combinations, yes. And I'm not sure, Catherine, if that's a capacity that collaborative provides, but I think the point is a lot of professionals out with a fairly good handle at any given moment on what's there in terms of resources, and turning to them can often be a really great place to start.
Nick, I don't know if the people on here realize HCB, Vermont Land Conservation, they have a program like they're called the READY program. And we had a grant, put together this program in ag in my area. And the first year, one grant writer, over $2 million in funding. And so we're tripling that. It's in budget. So Gus Seelk at VHCB is going to have, I believe it's 3 people now that communities can call upon, and it's for rural communities under 5,000. So it's for our small towns, and they'll help communities find money and even help write the grants for them. So, you know, if we need something or a community something, that's going to be available for them.
That sounds great, Senator. Yeah, that sounds like quite the resource, and maybe something we could even pull in an example into the follow-up, the notes for this
I'm gonna
session.
Plug the website, Nick, right into the chat if anyone's interested in it.
Perfect.
Jenna, plug it right in, and the email for at least one person now that manages that. Excited to hear there's going to be more staffing.
Gonna be.
That's great.
That 200% increase. Look at that.
The way I looked at that, if one can do 2, we ought to be able to do it at least 5 million. So why not go for it?
Why stop at 3? I say.
Well, we test them, make sure it's working.
Well, that's really to hear, Senator. Any other, while we're sort of the tail end, timing-wise of this, thinking about good strategies locally, and I want to open it up too to not just what are you seeing, but any ideas. I mean, kind of in line with the shift from what are the challenges, what would we like to see now, what are the strategies promising or otherwise we're seeing on the ground, and then what ideas for local, at any level, local action, regional action, or even statewide. And we touched on some things, but are any other good, really creative, innovative solutions kicking around in people's heads, or now is a great time to let them be heard?
I feel like I'm monopolizing a little bit, but I would like to talk about how, in general, our population in Essex County has to try things differently. And that's been so good. It's a change in mindset. People are going to telemedicine, we have to go to Dartmouth or UVM, which is a 3 drive either way to see our specialists. So using telemedicine, like, you know, people are doing it, leaders are doing it. It's really great. And like I said, with the loving public laptops you can use outside, you can get telemedicine. That's an example. But being willing to do it differently is really positive. And I think we have to commend each other that we are, look at us, we're on Zoom. Ooh, Zoom. Now we Zoom, we all know how to mute. We know what each other's dogs sound like. And I'd like to talk while I have the mic to Tracy that I was in a VTLA discussion with Peter Welch, and he said such great stuff about, we got electricity out to the rural people. We're going to get internet out to the rural people, and it's going to happen. So it's as fresh and as fierce in my mind as the day he said it. Thank you.
Other ideas? Thank you so much, Sharon. I don't think you're monopolizing at all, or at least I'm not hearing any other complaints. So anybody else have some ideas for ways we can move forward towards recovery? I have a specific question. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I think their need willingness to collaborate and share ideas will be very helpful. And I think a lot of our communities together and realizing they're all in the same situation. But when I'll use the CUDs as an example, when the Northeast Kingdom started our communications union district, the existing 2 districts that were in Vermont were very willing to share ideas, and so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. That sort of a situation across all types of issues is going to be important.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's been beaten to death mostly by me. I think that's what makes us strong as a people. Other ideas? I'm wondering specifically, so in challenges that you guys brought up in thinking about, well, maybe up and including higher ed, but specifically kind of elementary and high school and childcare, to degree Catherine was talking about the intentions in outdoor learning. I think one of the challenges we're going to see with this pandemic, right, it's going to get cold soon. I don't know about you guys. I woke up chilly in the morning before it. And it's kind of hard to have, I mean, it's great to have kids outside and have classrooms, but it's definitely a big factor if you got to keep track of boots and gloves and hats and the rest of it. And so I think there are some solutions that are definitely emerging that have a kind of a season crutch and are relying on sort of summer conditions. And I'm wondering, thinking to Catherine's point about the guy in the sleet, the poor guy on the Craftsbury deck, ideas about ways to capture some of the innovation we've been seeing this summer, but bring a very different scenario where we're going to get chased doors pretty soon. I'm curious if anybody has specific thoughts on that, because I see that as a real pressing.
What about the testing of students going to school? Today, I questioned the Commissioner of Health about testing, at least temperature testing of students when they get on a bus. And he said that they had a lot of pushback from the ed people that would be too much trouble. But, if you tested students when they get on the bus, at the school, they probably are still going to be well, but someone on that bus could get to the schoolhouse and contaminate the whole load of children on the bus. And so I don't know about Essex, if they do a lot of busing there, or is it mostly privately run, or to get the children picked up and to school?
In Canaan, children will have their temperatures taken at ENSU at Canaan. Temperatures are being taken before they get on the bus, and there's strict protocol for isolation. There are fevers during the day. In all that big, remember big long list of towns I listed, there's no busing. That's 14 to 13 towns where the kids don't bus. It's private transfer unless the school chooses to get the children. So I guess that's a two-parter, but the first part is in Canaan, those kids are being before the bus, and parents are being told, be ready if your kid's at the bus stop with a fever to make your plan for the day. What a choice parents have. You can't go to work that day. You need childcare. There are no childcare centers in Canaan, Vermont. There aren't any.
I'll be there, yeah.
Yeah, there's clearly a lot to be overcome.
Jenna, we don't have a Head Start in Canaan, right? Yeah, there's not even a Head Start in Canaan.
There'd be a Head Start before I started. Yeah, it closed, I think 4 years.
You know, if they're not allowed in school because of a temperature, they wouldn't be allowed in the child care program if there was one.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, I'm sort of regretfully looking at the time here, and I do want to leave enough time for us to trend back. And before that, I'll give our visiting team has been very respectfully silent, I think, for most of this. I'll give them a little bit of an opportunity to reflect conversation and maybe share some of their perspective and any resources that seem pertinent to some of the things we've done. So we heard from Catherine at the beginning. Maybe Catherine, we could circle back a little bit at the end if there's time, but I want to turn to first John Tracy. If you would take a minute just to share your reflections on this conversation and maybe any updates from the swamp that
yes
seem relevant to this topic.
Not
And
much
thank you so much
from down there. I found your commentary about strength of communities, the strength of relationships, and the willingness to do things differently to be something maybe it's not unique, but we tend to embrace it. You know, I mentioned this in the meeting we had down in Bennington. You know, it used to be you do a white paper on something, and then 2 years later they tell you what you did wrong. We don't have that time now. People are just diving in and trying the solutions, and it really does make a difference. Things like the outdoor learning, you know, while the weather is good, that's incredible for us. I found it interesting understanding with different school schedules, it's going to be difficult for parents, workers to maintain their jobs, but listing happening at the hospital will put a perspective on it to where, you know, with all the varying school schedules, depending on where you are, that's really going to take some agility to adjust to that. So that's a real challenge. You know, one of the things we're all realizing as I sat there with their baby, you know, this COVID virus I think it's really made us realize what's important. That actually working at home has helped me realize how important family time is. I mean, here we are, we're on call from 6:30 to 8:30 at noon, so we're still working a lot. It gives you an opportunity to reflect on how important family is, how important your communities are. And I think Sean, you said uncanny way of finding cracks. I think we found that in Vermont and nationwide. Hopefully, as a nation, we can make some changes there. We'll see. In DC right now, there hasn't been any progress on the Senate side with the latest COVID-19 legislation. You know, the House passed the HEROES Act a while back, looking for $3.5 billion to kick in. Senator McConnell hasn't had any hearings on it. President Trump's indicated maybe $1 trillion. Democrats are working very hard to get more money to state and local governments because, Bobby, as you well know and local officials know, built budgets on projected revenue. And so that revenue evaporated. Now, thankfully, there was the money that went to all the states, the $1.25 billion that came to Vermont. Treasury dictated the interpretations of that, and it was very frustrating. Depending on what happens, and they go back into session on the 8th, we'll be able to make some progress. There's rumors that the Republicans have a bill they haven't shared with anybody It may do something on UI. It may do something on the post office, which is another big issue for us all. So we'll see what happens there. But I think the important thing is that if we're fortunate enough to get additional funds into the state of Vermont or additional flexibility, be huge. Now, Senator Leahy was on horn with Agri Secretary the last week to try to get an extension of the Farmers to Families program. So that'll help. Try to get extensions, the programs for ability to build and upgrade housing units. I mean, the money's there. All practicality, they won't be able to those housing units constructed in that timeline. So there's a continual push to try to extend those. So the Democrats in the Senate will keep pushing on that. And I'm just saying that because that's the reality, the way it is right now. And we luck will make progress. But, we've done on the local level is just really inspiring now Vermonters through this crisis again. So it's always good to hear. We hear it throw up, and it's great.
Thanks, John. And of course, thank you for all the work you and the senator do down there. And lucky to have good, strong representation down in Washington. So I'm very grateful for that perennially. Let's see, did I just shifted around on my screen? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the conversation and maybe anything you feel like we didn't touch related to childcare or things from where you sit.
I just wanted to comment and follow up on what John was saying about the positivity, the resist, and I wrote down a particular quote. The relationships enabled the region to move quickly and reduce the crisis. And again, some of Sharon's comments about seeking out resources for the small town in Canaan, but those resources that you were able to receive, what a great impact it has on that small community. So the positivity, yes, even in this crisis, just really struck me. We didn't talk a lot about child. Someone did say that child care. We have a child care desert in Essex County. All over the kingdom, it's an issue, but particularly in Essex County. And so, there are some grants available. Those are some resources that we could put out there for folks. But it is the other issue is not only lack of childcare, but when you have childcare, is it affordable for families? And that is a huge issue as well. And in related other conversations we had tonight, or you had, is the workforce development. And I think it was Sean Tester talking about the workforce issues for the hospital, very similar in terms of the childcare field, what he was talking about, and how it relates to actually higher education and NVU. So a lot of the discussion, childcare didn't come up specifically a lot. It's all tied into many of the issues that were brought up. So I have a lot of notes, but I know we're short on them, but those are sort of some of the highlights that great conversation to listen to.
Really great. Yeah, thank you, Linda. And I'll share the reflection that I've so far, and I don't know, part of 5 or 6 of these forums, and for something that happens from 6:30 to 8:30 on a Thursday night, rarely do I want to spend any more time Zooming, but every single time I feel like we've been sort of cut short, and I wish there were more time to get into more issues. Just so rich, the set of ideas that come to the surface. So we do have a couple more, so we have to head back over at 10 after. My computer corner says 8:03. So I'd like to turn, Catherine, I'm not sure if you're otherwise engaged, if you have some reflections to share. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I feel like I've chimed in.
Well, and then
Nick,
maybe I'll open it up, to any last thoughts from everybody else. Sure.
one more really quickly. We talked about weather, to quote one of our local meetings, that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad thing. So we're on that in Canaan. And one thing that I have to brag up about ANSU at Canaan Schools is our CTE program, building our workforce. We have a huge CTE program, which is doing fire sciences, health sciences, buildings, CAD technology, business, diversified agriculture, and resources. It's huge and expanding. So it's such an asset in our area, and I would love to talk more about it. And people are interested in it. The kids are. My son is. He's got plans to be an engineer. He's also going to sugar. So he's doing intro to diversified ag because he can go outside without the mask. And that's going to get expanded because of COVID. And it's just unique, interesting. It's going to be workforce and round out our sturdy community side.
That's really interesting, Sharon. I haven't thought before about how the impact of the pandemic on offerings specifically, but absolutely that makes sense. Representative Page or John, yeah.
Just it's an opportunity for you and talking about sharing, best practices statewide, the upcoming Vermont Community Leadership Network and that'll be coming out is that goal will hopefully be achieved in part by that.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, it's almost like you're on staff or something with the.
You take it from here.
I mean, that is a great segue. I won't spend too much time here. Maybe Jenna, if you're able to dig up the link for the registration for the launch event, it might be
I'd love to.
In the chat. We are this fall, VCRD, many partners launching this community leadership network, which is supposed to be a support network, kind of pivoting into the virtual moment for anyone who identifies as a leader across the state. So that's clearly anybody in this call and anybody, your mom may learn as well, like anybody who is working to advance things off of their community. And we're going to, at the same time, launch this network, which will have a series of virtual workshops on a number of topics. And it's all sort of loosely built around this Vermont Community Leadership Guide that we will also be publishing, which is this tome that Jenna and I spent several months on compiling kind of the wisdom of multiple decades now of Council on Rural Development community visit work, where we go to communities, get people's ideas, sort of steps to advance local projects. So that'll be something that's coming out. That's over 100 pages, maybe over 150 pages, and it has chapter headings. If you want to advance a sewer project in your village, like here are the people to contact, here are the steps to go about that. It's some skills support, reach to the public engagement. We are very excited about that initiative and hope that here will be part of it. So I see Jenna's got the link to that in the chat. Happy to follow up after the fact. So with that, there's nobody has any last pressing comments. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. Paul tends to be quite punctual, and so maybe we should work transitioning. Lastly, I want to say thank you within the small group so much to everyone who's been a part. I know it's not a short period of time to give up on an evening, but really, I think this has been one of the greatest conversations I've been part of, and really appreciate all the wisdom and creativity you all bring there on the process. So thank you deeply, and hopefully this isn't the last touch point we have. But to the question of navigating through virtual space back to the main session, it should be exactly the same process as it was to come here. You'll see Jenna has posted in the chat the link. If you can just do that, then leave this meeting. That's the bottom right-hand of your screen. A little button says leave. Post the copied link into browser, and it should take you right back to the opening session. So I see some people are already doing that, and let's go for it. And I'll plan on meeting you back in the main room. We kept coming back to this refrain of the resiliency and ingenuity of folks in this area. and in the Northeast Kingdom more broadly. Just some real willingness to adapt new models and to pivot in ways that are really innovative, from outdoor classrooms to innovative solutions about broadband. We talked about the possibility of public buildings becoming hubs for students in the future. We spent a lot of time talking about the importance of NVU and kind of the role of higher ed in the conversation. I'd say if there was another salient emergent theme, it was really that you can't have any one conversation about education without touching on transportation or broadband or workforce. And so our conversation was broad and far-reaching, and I think really deep. We heard some good reflections from our visiting team. And yeah, really, I would just say it all kept coming back to the importance of collaboration and strengthening our community infrastructure so that if a best practice emerges in one region, folks don't have to reinvent the wheel in a neighboring community, and really leveraging the power of our Vermont collective community spirit, but doing so in a way that pivots into the virtual world. So not to minimize any of the challenges, and obviously there's going to be a lot of ongoing work in this arena and others, but definitely a lot of hope in the room and great representation on the call, and what an honor to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Nick. The transportation conversation was also complex like that. Let's recognize that Essex County is as rural as it gets in Vermont. And so that means all the rural challenges are that much more challenging, and the rural assets of neighborliness and good people who help each other are also very strong. So, you know, the transportation situation with COVID is really complex. We have the decline in ridership on public transportation in the kingdom by 80% with COVID. And now it's come back up a little bit, but it's still only 40% of normal or so. Meanwhile, you have people who are tremendously isolated. Their children are isolated. They may not be getting stimulation. There may be, we heard about people who are in their homes and call the Community Action Agency every week or so just to have someone to talk to, because they're at the end of the road and they're not traveling, they're not going anywhere. Everything's closed, and the rural isolation that you can feel anytime can be really maximized, especially if you're a vulnerable person. There was a really strong concern about the most vulnerable of us and how people get their meds and how they get groceries, how do they get services, how do they get to doctor's appointments. And the existing transportation provider, RCT, you know, is doing a lot of good, but also has gaps. And you know, it's hard for them to get over to Canaan, and it's hard for them to do Norton. And there's places that don't get deep services, and there's, you know, the ridership is very minimal in some places. But there was a lot of hope for improvement in a sense that there's work to be done. One person said, you know, if we're really concerned about these issues, we have to have a larger conversation, and we have to bring in the people who have these needs to be part of the conversation for us to actually address those needs well. And also that the answers to the transportation challenges, it's like they would be resolved if there was return on investment for expanding public transportation. The challenge is there's not enough of a return, so you need to be making public investment, and that's difficult. There's also a sense that people were very concerned that the public transportation system can feel complex and inflexible because of the way that funding streams support different parts of their work and how they serve different populations, and all of that's challenging. But there's really some good things that have happened. You know, in Canaan, they got mobile testing unit to come to them. Folks have really stepped up delivering food in different community. Newport folks were offering rides to each other. Lowell built a warm line to provide mutual aid and help people solve any number of problems. Peacham set up an incident command setup. but there's gaps, and I'm glad that NVDA folks are on the line. It was really great to have leadership from our team, from Doug from NVDA to think about this. He's working towards a renewal of the regional plan and is interested in doing more outreach and connecting more with people on elements that could go into that plan that could be ameliorative. There was a strong sense that more facilitation, more conversation would be really good, that we were scratching the surface of something that it would be really great to have a sort of systems conversation. And whether NVDA or the NEK Collaborative or other groups could pull some of the people together who could be impactful in this arena, including people like from Northeast Kingdom Human Services and from other groups that are working with low-income people, alongside of employers and folks who have potential to help extend systems for public transportation. And then there was the idea, well, maybe we could help some people fix up cars. Like, what are the different vehicles of work that we could be doing together if we sat down and knocked out some systems ideas? People like Trish Sears and several others talked about being a little more audacious, a little more, have a little stronger push, try to frame things with sort of our greatest and hardest creativity bringing to bear. And so it was a really fertile conversation. It's not done, and these are challenges that as Doug pointed out, come and go. But it does feel like there's an opportunity now to push the envelope and to try to improve circumstances, especially for those who are most vulnerable. So I thought it was a great conversation and a lot of heart and a lot of great intelligence from people who are working really hard to move things forward. I want to go back to Jenna for just a minute and have Jenna tell us what's going to come next. Like, how are we going to hear back after this meeting, and are there ways for us to follow some of the issues that came up in the discussion, Jenna?
Yeah, sure. So in both of the sessions this evening, we were capturing detailed notes. We also will have recordings that Kingdom Access. Thank you to Kingdom Access for capturing the recordings from the two sessions. So we're going to compile that, but in the next couple of days, you'll see an email from us with a link to a survey. We'd love additional input. You know, we recognize a lot of people aren't on the call, they have input to share. So please share that with your networks and help us to get word even beyond the discussions we had tonight. But also, if you have additional input to share, feel free to plug that in, and we're going to build that into our notes along with the notes from this evening, and we'll get back to you. But we're also going to include the contact information for visiting team members that were on the call this evening. So if you want to connect with those folks, you'll have that contact information. We're also going to share, and in the follow-up, a linked website that the Governor's Action team that Paul is sharing. They've built a website to share recovery strategies around the state. A lot, as Nick mentioned in our forum, we talked a lot about the opportunity to share what's going on in other regions, how are people addressing recovery and move forward, and this is an opportunity to both share your stories with us so we can broadcast those out, but also to see what other regions are working on. So we'll share that in the follow-up as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenna. I think we should also share the fact that there's, on the 27th, 10 o'clock in the morning, there's going to be a community leadership launch event and an ability for people to access a community leadership guide that's going to be distributed in Vermont very soon. And so we should probably send out that invitation and link.
We talked about that in our forum as well. I'll share it right here in the chat. So this is the link to register for that launch event. We'd love to see you all there.
So I'd love to turn it over to our great partner, Dave Snedeker from NVDA, to share a couple of observations of where he sees things in the kingdom.
Thank you, Paul. First of all, thanks to the governor's recovery team and to your team at VCRD for organizing and hosting these events. I know that they were typically done on a countywide basis around the state, but the Northeast Kingdom is fortunate to have 3 counties, so we get to have 3 events, which allows us to cover more topical areas. and let me know what's important to us. So I think that's very important. And I think most importantly, I'd like to thank all the participants coming and attending and willingness to share your ideas and thoughts for going forward. So I think the culmination of all these 3 events for the Kingdom and Vermont will help us have a good path forward. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave. I want to recognize Representative Page, who's with us, and Senator Starr, doing great work for the Kingdom and Essex County. Honored to have you guys with us. I also want to echo that thanks to NEK TV, Kingdom Access. You guys do great work. It's an honor to have your partnership. To thank the visiting team, to thank the congressional staff that are with us, the agency staff, the people on this visiting team who go beyond the call of duty. They're on the line at night, working beyond their day jobs because, like you all, they're dedicated to the future of Vermont. We love the Northeast Kingdom. Essex County is a priceless place. It's not like any other part of Vermont. You carry the soul of Vermont like nowhere else, and you're on the line to make it strong and to make it better. And it's an incredible honor to be listening and reflecting with you all about the future. It's when we weave together the little acts of neighborliness, the work that we do in our towns, the regional acts that we do, the great work that Senator Leahy and Senator Sanders and Congressman Welch do in Washington, D.C., the work of our legislators, all these things aren't disconnected. For people in Vermont, we're pulling together, and Vermont is strong because of that. And again, it's a great honor to be part of this very patriotic conversation about our future. Together, we're going to come out of this better, more resilient, more strong, but it's all because of you. Have courage, and thanks a million for being part of the conversation today. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy the evening.